police reform. President Donald Trump signs an executive order on making communities more safe. We're at the White House. Seeking answers. An update on the lawsuit against New York's governor and New York City's mayor filed by 2 Catholic priests. Border battle. Hostilities resume between North and South Korea. And music to his ears. How a Catholic church in New Jersey delivered a special message to one parishioner. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, June 16th, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Donald Trump announces an executive order to improve police procedures. This follows massive nationwide protests and violent riots demanding police reform and accountability, especially when using deadly force. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, here at the White House, President Trump says police officers have one of the most dangerous jobs in all of the world. But at the same time, there has to be better transparency and accountability.
Americans want law and order. They demand law and order.
In the White House Rose Garden, President Donald Trump praises police and calls for action to improve policing.
That is why today I'm signing an executive order encouraging police departments nationwide to adopt the highest professional standards to serve their communities.
One key item?
Chokeholds will be banned, except if an officer's life is at risk.
It was the death of George Floyd while in police custody that sparked weeks of protests, riots, and a nationwide introspection on race. Police chiefs everywhere re-examining how they enforce the law.
I think in a deadly encounter, a clear deadly encounter, officers have to use whatever they can to protect their life and that of another. However, we've abolished chokehold.
Our victims of crime, specifically violent crimes, need to be supported, and dismantling police departments can't be the answer to that.
Meanwhile, encouraging news for the White House on the economic front. Retail sales jumped nearly 18% from April to May. And in the ongoing battle against COVID-19, which has infected over 2 million Americans, killing more than 116,000, healthcare workers in New York haunted by what they experienced and nervous about the future.
The lingering fear of the second wave is what makes everybody, I think, still sleep a little bit less well and worry more.
Back to that executive order, it also calls for more powerful but less lethal weapons and for better tracking of abusive police officers so they don't just go from department to department unchecked. Tracy?
White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Owen. While Democratic lawmakers continue to feel the pressure from protesters to defund police departments, but at least one U.S. senator says he agrees with President Trump to do the opposite and spend more on training. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, that senator is Senator Rick Scott, Republican out of Florida. Now, listen to this. He calls defunding the police the single most irresponsible, ridiculous policy idea that he's ever heard of in his lifetime. Very strong words there. And he also adds that defunding the police would hurt struggling communities who need law enforcement the most.
To not fund them, that means that every community in our state or any place that you don't do that is going to be less safe.
Senator Rick Scott wrote in an op-ed, defunding the police is lunacy, and no logical person would respond to this killing by suggesting the elimination or defunding of law enforcement. Some prominent Democrats are echoing that opinion.
Nobody is going to defund the police. We can restructure police forces, restructure, reimagine policing. That is what we're going to do.
And today, Senator Rick Scott told me communities need good police officers.
Every law enforcement member I've talked to since the George Floyd thing happened is disgusted. They know that shouldn't happen. They know it wasn't the right thing to do. They know those officers didn't do their job the right way, and they're disgusted. But we're not going to taint every member of law enforcement because a few did the wrong thing. So let's figure out how to hold those few accountable.
And Republicans largely agree. Now is not the time to follow the Democrats' plan to limit qualified immunity, which protects police from lawsuits for money as a result for things they do in the course of their job.
Anything that we can do to create more accountability, to have better training, I am all in. But from the standpoint that I want these same individuals that are putting their lives at risk now to put their wallet at risk, I want to be very cautious to make any change there.
Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer has repeatedly urged Leader Mitch McConnell to pass some sort of police reform bill. Now, we just learned within the past few hours some breaking news that Republican senators have agreed to look at Senator Tim Scott's bill. And a vote could possibly take place at the end of this week or next week. So some big news from Capitol Hill. Tracy.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill for us tonight. 2 Catholic priests and 3 Orthodox Jewish congregants are suing New York's governor, the state's attorney general, and the mayor of New York City for civil rights violations. The lawsuit brought against Governor Andrew Cuomo, Mayor Bill de Blasio, and Attorney General Letitia James says they have, quote, selectively enforced social distancing guidelines during the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining me now on Skype is Montse Alvarado, Vice President and Executive Director at Beckett, a nonprofit law firm dedicated to protecting religious freedom. Montse, welcome back to the show. So good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Thank you for having me.
Well, this lawsuit calls the actions by Cuomo and de Blasio an unprecedented abuse of power. How have both the stay-at-home orders and the reopening plans been used to discriminate against people of faith?
You know, Tracy, we've been watching this around the country and been a part of reopenings in Wisconsin and Minnesota where governors and, local officials just are not paying attention to the important constitutional questions, but also the important human questions. Right now, our country is dealing with really deep, personal, and feeling a lot of pain. People are in a lot of pain and they want to be able to go to their religious leaders for resources that are going to help them get through these difficult moments. And in order to do that, we need to open up those churches the same way that we're opening up retailers and playgrounds and hairdressers.
Yeah, and this suit points out the double standard between the way religious services and the protest in response to the death of George Floyd are being handled. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And is there one example that really stands out in your mind?
I have to tell you that having de Blasio on that lawsuit brings back some of the horrible comments that he made in the beginning of this pandemic and this crisis in our country when everyone was sheltering in place and trying to be very careful. He was really going after the Jewish community, being very specific about targeting them for wanting to very safely get together when you saw people on the streets trying to commemorate the passing of a leader in their community, and they were in masks and in gloves. If you take a picture of that moment when people were trying to gather in a very painful moment in time for their specific community, and then you contrast it with the picture of the protests around the country when we are dealing with this, very, very painful issue for a lot of members of our community and for anyone who would say that they're part of a racial minority, having them kneeling and part of processions and part of moments of silence, which we know are moments of prayer where we're praying for healing in our country. When you contrast those kind of gatherings with the gatherings that were being targeted by de Blasio early in the pandemic, you really see that he is making prudential judgments. He is choosing the kind of exercise and the kind of speech that he wants to endorse, and that's unconstitutional.
As we mentioned before, two of the plaintiffs in this case are Catholic priests. How have the restrictions affected them and Catholics during this time?
It's really painful for a lot of these priests to be called unessential, for them to feel like the government really doesn't value the kind of partnership that they bring to the table, the beautiful things that the church does to create a better community and to create resources for, especially right now, for people in need. It makes me think about the Little Sisters of the Poor. It makes me think about all of the doctors that are compelled by their religious faith to stay the extra hour, to be there, to help people who are in need right now and in crisis. So I believe that it's very painful. And also for the people who suffer from loneliness or suffer from addictions and rely on the sacraments for accountability, this is a very, very difficult time where they're watching people able to go for retail therapy, but they can't go for any kind of spiritual solace to the places where they need to go, that are also following strict guidelines to keep people safe. There isn't a church that is trying to, at least not the ones in question here, that are trying to keep anyone, to put anyone in harm's way. They're being very careful.
Well, Monse, thank you so much for your time. Monse Alvarado, Vice President and Executive Director at Beckett. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Scientists at Imperial College in London are starting to immunize people with an experimental coronavirus vaccine this week. And while it may not actually cure infections, it could protect people from getting COVID-19.
A successful vaccine would ideally block infection and stop the virus being transmitted. That would be better than a vaccine that only prevents against serious disease. So that's what we're kind of targeting, is one that really will stop transmission.
The experimental COVID-19 vaccine is being tested on 300 healthy people. Scientists have never created vaccines from scratch this fast, and there are no guarantees that this vaccine will be successful. Chinese officials say this week's new outbreak of COVID-19 in the capital of Beijing could peak tomorrow. They also say they detected the initial spread at a wholesale market early enough that they should be able to contain the outbreak. That said, all schools in Beijing are now closing. Tensions are rising on the Korean peninsula after North Korea blew up an office building on the border. It was a liaison office in the border town of Kaesong that was supposed to improve communication between the two Koreas. But North Korea has been angry at defectors in the south who regularly send leaflets critical of North Korea over the border. Clashes between India and China on their shared border have now turned deadly, with 20 Indian soldiers killed in clashes overnight. The clashes were in the Galwan Valley. No gunfire was involved. Indian and Chinese troops used iron rods and hand-to-hand combat and threw stones at each other. The fight in the snow deserts in the Kashmir region of the western Himalayas left at least 20 Indian soldiers and an unknown number of Chinese soldiers dead. The first deaths between China and India in over 45 years. The leader of Hong Kong is again urging people to support the controversial national security law. However, Carrie Lam, a Catholic, could not explain details of the pending law that targets subversive activity. Meanwhile, large crowds honored a protester who died 1 year ago at a memorial outside of a shopping mall last night, even though it was banned by police. An update on a story we brought you last week from the Vatican. The Italian businessman detained by Holy See police on charges of extortion and fraud has been released. The claims against Gianluigi Torzi are from a London real estate deal. His lawyers call the charges a misunderstanding. An Argentine bishop close to Pope Francis has gone back to work at the Vatican despite being under investigation for an alleged sexual abuse. Bishop Gustavo Zanqueta is being investigated in his native Argentina and at the Holy See. Vatican officials say his job at his financial administration office does not interfere with the probes. Andrea Galeoducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News, joins us now from Rome. Andrea, welcome back. Tell us, why is Bishop Zanqueta back at work if he remains under investigation?
According to the Holy See spokesperson, Bishop Zanqueta came back to the Vatican to work because his presence at work in the Vatican does not interfere with investigations back in Argentina. And the Vatican spokesperson also said that Bishop Zanqueta is always available with Argentinian prosecutors. In addition to that, the lawyer said that the position of Zanqueta is going to be cleared up, according to him. Actually, we don't know how the investigations are going. We're waiting for a ruling from the Argentinian court. And in the meantime, time Zanchetta is working, it's kind of a strange situation because he had been suspended before because of the same investigation, and at the same time there are other Vatican officials suspended because of other investigations that came from inside the Vatican. So we must not hide, it's kind of strange.
Can you talk a little bit more about the charges he's facing?
Yeah, Bishop Zanchetta was charged back in 2015 in Argentina with two kind of charges. One was financial mismanagement, and the other was abuse, sex abuse. But he left actually the Archdiocese of Oran while he was Archbishop only in 2017 for health reason, because of health reason. And the year after, Pope Francis called him to the Vatican with the position of assessor in the administration for the Patrimony of the Apostolic See, the APSA, an Italian acronym that works as a sort of central bank for the Vatican. These two charges are still ongoing. There is a prosecution in Argentina, and we're still waiting for the results of the investigation.
We know that Bishop Zanchetta works at the Vatican Central Bank. Pope Francis just appointed the first layperson to work there. How significant is that?
Well, it's pretty significant. The two things are not related. Actually, the secretary of the APSA, the so-called Vatican Central Bank, that is also it's a sort of powerhouse of Vatican assets. It owns all the Vatican assets and the Vatican real estate. The position of secretary was vacant in that moment because the former secretary just expired his term. A layperson is a new thing. Nobody has ever been a layperson in charge of secretary. It's important because it comes into this reform, financial reform of the Vatican, and the APSA is also central in the reform of the procurement. There was a law on procurements in the Vatican. So this new guy will boost up the role of central bank for the APSA, and at the same time will try to clear up some of the procurement issues that have been crucial in the past.
Andrea Gaglioducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, more reaction to the Supreme Court's ruling on sexual orientation and gender identity. The president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference expresses his deep concern over yesterday's Supreme Court ruling that employers cannot fire workers because of their sexual orientation nor self-determined gender identity. The statement from Archbishop Jose Gomez of Los Angeles reads in part, "Every human person is made in the image and likeness of God and without exception must be treated with dignity, compassion, and respect. Protecting our neighbors from unjust discrimination does not require redefining human nature." Joining me now on Skype with his reaction to yesterday's ruling is Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Ryan is also author of the book When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment. Ryan, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be with you.
Absolutely. In stating his concerns over the ruling, Archbishop Gomez says that he's concerned that the Supreme Court has effectively redefined the legal meaning of sex in our nation's civil rights law. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Archbishop got this exactly right. We don't need to redefine human nature. We don't need to redefine sex. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court did yesterday. What they said is that if you don't treat a man who identifies as a woman as if he actually is a woman, you're discriminating on the basis of sex and you're violating federal law. And if that's the case for employment law, it's going to have huge implications for other areas of the law that also ban discrimination on the basis of sex, such as education law, healthcare law. These laws were meant to say you have to treat boys and girls equally. You have to treat men and women equally. And now the Supreme Court is saying that you have to treat boys who identify as girls as if they are girls. Otherwise, you run the risk of a lawsuit saying you discriminate on the basis of sex.
Ryan, I know that you filed an amicus brief in support of the employers in two of the cases being considered by the court. What are the broader implications of this ruling?
Sure. So this isn't just limited to the employment context. As I mentioned, this will have implications for the education context. How will bathrooms, locker rooms, sports teams, athletic competitions, dorm rooms, hotel rooms, how will they now be governed? Will they be based on biological reality or subjective identity? And the implication here from the court is that they now have to be done based on subjective identity, not reality. It'll have implications for healthcare law, whether or not it'll be considered discrimination on the basis of sex to refuse to do sex reassignment procedures. The argument here would be, well, if you provide a double mastectomy in the case of breast cancer, but you don't provide a double mastectomy in the case of gender dysphoria or someone who wants to change sexes, then you're discriminating on the basis of sex. So this is going to have far-reaching consequences, which is vitally important why we reject the ruling. We say the court got it wrong, and that it's important that we do whatever we can to limit the harm that this ruling will cause.
Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion for the court, acknowledging religious freedom concerns for employers. How do you think that we'll see that handled in the future?
Well, a lot is to be seen, and some of that will be determined by the court itself. There are two cases this term at the Supreme Court involving Catholic school teachers, and we're expecting a decision, anytime this month. And both of those will be litigated under the constitutional provision known as the ministerial exception. We'll see the court determine how broad or how narrow that definition of who counts as a minister. And do all Catholic school teachers count as a minister for the purposes of this ruling, or just some? And how do you figure that out? I think one of the things we're going to need to see here are both litigation coming from lawyers trying to defend religious liberty, but also legislation coming from Congress, trying to do whatever they can to minimize the impact of this ruling, to specify what good actions aren't discriminatory, so that everyone can have reality-based sports teams, biological reality, bathrooms, locker rooms, good medicine, good education. There's going to be a task here both for legislators and litigators.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the show today, and thanks so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Our bishops in Austria elect a new president of their bishops' conference. Archbishop Franz Lachner of Salzburg was elected yesterday. He commissioned a recently published book which explores blessing gay marriages in Catholic churches, an act that would run contrary to Catholic teaching. The 63-year-old Franciscan takes over from Cardinal Christoph Schornborn, who resigned after turning 75. The Dominican Archbishop of Vienna has been in charge of the Austrian Bishops' Conference for 22 years. Up next, a church in New Jersey has a special delivery for one of its parishioners. We'll explain. Many Catholics have been missing going to church during the coronavirus lockdown, and that is especially true for one young man in Maplewood, New Jersey. Ben is 21 and has special needs. He missed the singing in church so much that his parish priest surprised him with something special. EWTN News correspondent Colin Flynn reports.
Ben was born on November 29th, right, 1998. When he was 2.5, he was diagnosed with autism.
Sad.
When he was 5.5, we started learning how to go to Mass. What he liked most was dipping his finger in the holy water so he could make the sign of the cross. That was your favorite thing?
Go.
Okay, and then he likes putting the envelope in the collection basket. And now he likes shaking people's hands at church. Want to do it? No? Okay. I wanted him to understand and to learn how to participate in the Mass before he made his first Eucharist.
As Ben got older, he would look forward to going to Mass every Sunday, here at St. Joseph's Church in Maplewood, New Jersey, where Father Jim Worth is the pastor.
Ben just has a personality that's full of joy. It's been difficult for him because he's a man of routine.
And the thing that Ben misses the most about not being at church is the music and singing.
Let us build a house where love can dwell and all can safely live.
Father Jim is a talented musician and singer who once a month on a Tuesday would put on a mini concert called A Solace, and Ben loved them, never missing them.
So every single month he was used to coming to the church, rain or shine. His mother would take him, so it was a routine for him. And I felt that his routine was completely uprooted. So one of my goals was to give him something that was familiar to him.
Let us build a house where one can dwell and all can safely live.
Ben was thrilled to hear his name on the video and hear his favorite songs. And on the Tuesday nights when the Solace would normally be on in the church, his mother plays the concert for him again.
Oh, look at that. That's nice.
Next 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks?
Yes.
Will he have another Solace concert for you? What time? 7 o'clock. You're looking forward to that?
Yes.
Built of hopes and dreams and visions, rock of faith and vault of grace. Here the love of Christ shall end divisions.
They are the true messengers of Jesus because they're giving the message not by some intellectual word, they're giving it by their example. So they're really leading with their hearts and not their minds. Their hearts go before them. It lets us understand that, yeah, we have gifts, but we also have difficulties. It makes a community more honest.
Let this house proclaim from floor to ceiling, all are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place.
In Maplewood, New Jersey, Colm Flynn, EWTN News Nightly.
Wonderful story. And as always, you can see more from Colm and this story right now on our EWTN News Nightly Facebook page. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.